Good morning.
Good morning.
About a year and a half ago, I gave part of this presentation that I'm giving now. And so I finished it now, and the impetus to have that finished was, I remember when Pastor Andy started here, he was saying how he liked to go to the churches, and he'd walk in and he'd look at the stained glass windows and look at the names underneath and wondered who they all belonged to. So today I hope to kind of inform you of our ancestors and this sort of thing. Basically what I'm going to start and talk about is that some years back, and due to liking all these windows and stained glass, which is beautiful, I took a class in how to do stained glass myself. And I went to an art class studio on East A Street in Belleville, called Belleville Art Class. And I had some panels. I have a panel in my living room and some stained glass in some of my windows at home. And this girl who ran it, her name was Angela. And Angela was very prominent for doing stained glass windows in the local area here. And any of you that had gone to the original Maryland's Pie Pantry on North Charles Street there were a bunch of stained glass panels in there that she had done. I think there was one at Fisher's and several other places in Belleville that were done by her. She was my instructor. And a lot of this information, the history that I have, came from her because we had that in class. The stained glass panels and utilizing stained glass started back in 900 AD. And the reason it started way back then and why it started was to depict the various stories of the Bible. I mean, of course the churches had their scribes and they were telling people about the various stories in the Bible, but people wanted to see it, so the depiction happened to be in the stained glass windows that they made. Consequently, the larger the person in that stained glass window, the more important he was. Those that had halos around their head were, of course, I guess you would call them holy people. Now, medieval artisans added metallic salts and oxides to molten glass to get the colors. Example is the blue that we might see. The blue is from lapis lazuli. And what they did, they ground that all up, put it with some metallic salts and oxides, and that's how they got the colors back then. The hardest color and the most expensive color to get, of course, is red. Red is the most expensive color, and it's very hard to find, and it's hard to find a good red in order to do that. So consequently, they did that back then. And so, consequently, with the history and various different things, lead, we have two different types of windows here in our church. We have the lead glass, which is what I'm going to talk about today. The circular ones up there, those lining the outside of the circular, that's glass. Those on the end, that's leaded glass. Those on the inside, that is Tiffany. Tiffany glass or foiled glass. We don't have that much foiled glass here. Foiled glass was brought forth in probably the early 20th century because it was safer and this sort of thing, and easier to work with. It was predominantly produced and utilized by a company in New York called Tiffany and Company. That's how it got its name. A lot of us have lights or lamps or something that are Tiffany lamps that we have in our homes. That's foil, that's using foil. But we have, the majority of ours here are lead. The reason that things have had a little problem and with lead is that in the earlier years they didn't know how toxic it could be. And if any of you remember, maybe when you had children starting grade school, you had to take them and get a test for lead. It was a state requirement quite some years back because kids would take and scrape the paint off the walls and eat it. And consequently, there was a lot of lead poisoning in children at that time. People who really had a lot of, where lead was involved in, was your painters, your paint, gasoline, and other, I guess you'd say, consumer products had lead in them. And now, of course, our gasoline doesn't have lead, neither does our paints have that in. And so consequently, people that were working in that earlier stage, they could get easily a toxicity or lead poisoning. Symptoms of that was abdominal pain, headaches, anemia, seizures, and you would get a funny taste in your mouth, like when you used to go to the dentist and get your fillings put in, you get that funny taste. Well, you still would get that funny taste in your mouth with lead poisoning. And it affected a lot of areas of the body: the bones, the heart, kidneys, intestines, reproductive areas, and the nervous system. And many people died because back in the early days, your artisans, when they were doing stained glass, they would be exposed to all that lead. It would go into their pores, or they would cut glass and have cuts in there, and that lead would go in, and eventually they would end up having seizures. They lose their mind, they go into a coma and die. So consequently, that was the historical aspect of it. Now with me, when I wanted to do some lead glass making, I wanted to find out, okay, what am I going to need to do that? And you need a good set of pliers, you need a glass cutter, you need a board with a square corner because you can iron, so you can line up that square part in there. You need gloves, definitely gloves, and goggles just in case that glass splinters and flies around. You need solder, a soldering iron or a gun, and these windows have what they call double channeled lead, so that you could put one piece of glass here, put it in the channel, take the other piece of glass and line it up in the channel, and that would keep it good and solid. And at the corners is where you would do your soldering. Ours are excellent because you can hardly see the solder. So consequently, that has been a way in which you had to do it. And you needed T-pins. Now, T-pins are similar to those a lot of people have done, I guess you would call ceramic tile on their floor, or either a ceramic tile on the backsplash, or you have to go in and make a little spot and then put your tile next to it, then make another little, put a little, another thing in there. They're similar to that though, like the T-pins are, so that you can fill in between. I had a good time doing that. I really enjoyed it. And I guess what I'm wanting to go into now is that I gave you a little history of stained glass. We're going to look at the colors of our windows. Our windows are beautiful. Our windows are really great. Some years back, I guess about 50, 60 years ago, you'll notice in that back window back there, there are several small panes that do not match. What happened, we had some rambunctious kids and they broke a couple of panes of our windows and we had to replace that. So consequently, they didn't match. These windows have been were installed and were made for us sometime after 1902, and I can document that due to Sophie Wiegand's name on that window, which we'll get into a little later. We have colors here in our windows. We have another color back in our narthex there, too, another one over our window. But we'll talk about these right here. You notice we have red and green and yellow and blue and violet. Don't have too much white here. White's back the other way. The red symbolizes the blood of Christ. It symbolizes sacrifice, suffering, and courage. If you look at the top, you'll see those three little triangles going into that. That signifies, and that stands and symbolizes the thorn of crowns that was on Christ's head when he was crucified. Again, and there are three of them, signifying Father, Son, Holy Spirit. If you look a little farther down, you'll see some green, you'll see lavender, you'll see blue. Blue signifies and stands for hope, stands for the sky, stands for the sky. Also is symbolic of peace and serenity, loyalty, and the light of heaven. If you look a little farther down, you'll see violet. Violet is hard to kind of describe, as you can see here that we have some violet where it's kind of shaded, and some of the blue has got some violet in it. It's hard to get a straight, solid blue color. It's just as it's hard in some ways to get a red one. And that violet stands for love, truth, passion, and God the Father. If you notice, our docile curtain is violet. Advent, violet. If you've been to the Catholic Church, you know the Monsignors, the popes, have a big ring that's got a violet stone in it. That's why they have a violet stone in theirs. An amethyst, generally. So consequently, the violet rings through on that. We also have another color up there, the yellow. We have yellow streaming down the side, which kind of blends into a green. And the yellow stands for sun, harvest, ripening harvest. It also stands for the earth and the gates of heaven. Also causes, is good, and it stands in, eventually the yellows can move into tans and browns and I guess various different oranges and that, symbolizing what we have got up there, which symbolizes the browns and the tan, earthly needs, health, earth, whatever. The green stands for, and we see green up there in several places, again, where the threes are located, the oval spots, where the three are located, and that, again, refers to the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And green is also the color of spring. Faith, where you have triumph of life over death and triumph of spring over winter. So what we're going to talk about, and we don't have white in this, we have white back in the other window, which refers to chastity and purity, and black refers to death and regeneration. You don't see a lot of that in most of the windows. Our windows are very lucky because they're handmade. We have handmade windows here. A lot of churches you go to, you won't see handmade windows because you can't see all that lead that we have. So what I'd like to put this together is the sky is the blue shining down on us with the help of God with the purple, and the yellow and the green comes around, which is spring, which therefore causes our plants to grow and we have good harvest due to the yellow and that. You can tell the type of community that we have here by the color. All the tans signifies this is an agricultural community. And that is for sure, Smithton is agricultural. We need the sky, we need the sun, and we need the spring so that we can bring in a good harvest and so our crops will grow. So that's the symbolism of our windows. A lot of them, as you notice, we have in here is the dome kind, the arch kind. Now that is Roman. That is Roman in origin, just like down here in the lower part of our windows. They're dome-shaped as well, and and rounded that way. We don't have, if you look up here, we have some things that are oval-shaped, dome-shaped. Mostly has a point to it, which points towards a Corinthian basis. We don't really have that. We do have some pillars here. Those are pointing, they're very plain, and and our windows, even though there's a lot of color in them and they're big and beautiful, they're relatively plain, and that is because the German people get down to the earth, do the work, do the job, no frills, no nothing. So consequently, that is the evidence and the way that we can describe our church and our windows here. A lot of other windows are more, I guess you would say, have more activity in them and more people in them. But most of those churches that I've gone to, those are Tiffany's type windows. And they have been utilized more so because of the safeness of not having to use the lead. So, anybody have any questions? We've gotten this far. Okay, I'm going to go into a little history of this church, just a little history. I'm not going to go too far into it, but I'm going to go into it a little bit, and then we're going to start on the windows. And Dolores still is here, and Dolores, in case I'm doing something wrong or give some wrong dates, please let me know. Okay? Our church, which was the Evangelical and Reformed in this town, was formed in 1849. And our first church that we had in this community, the Evangelical and Reformed, was in the cemetery, Franklin Cemetery, the Little Rock School. Now, a lot of times when we were in grade school, we had little trips to the Old Rock schools so we could look on the inside and stuff like that when we were younger. But the Little Rock School is no longer there, and it had to be dismantled and taken down about 1950, 1960. It got hit with a bad storm. Now, I belong to the Historical Society here in Smithton. We're trying to do some kind of restoration over there. So exactly what we're planning on doing is we're getting some sandstone. We're going to outline where the Rock School was and set that in. Do some landscaping, put a memorial sign up there, and possibly put a bench there. And so hopefully in the future we're going to do that. Now our building here was originally built in 1867, and the narthex where the steeple is and the back part of that church was built in 1900. I remember when I went to Sunday school for the first time, there was a little brick building right over here on the side. And we used to go to Sunday school in there, and it was a little brick building right where the driveway is here. And we used to go there until the educational building got built. However, the basement first got put in there, and took some years until that, I think it was in the 1960s before all of that got finished. So we had Sunday school in the basement there. And consequently, we think this building, this little red building, was taken down in the 50s. It was built about 1894. Now, our educational building, the basement part, was put in about 1951, and our addition over here on the side, Fellowship Hall, was put in 1987. So we have some historical background there. Now, anybody have any questions? Because I'm going to go into the names and how they signify things here. Okay. First one I want to get into is Reverend Hosto, right here. Reverend Hosto was our pastor that we had. He got out of Eden Seminary, I believe it was 1886. And he was our pastor here for 58 years. He retired in 1944, passed away in 1946. He had married his wife while he was here, and his wife's name was Elizabeth Apple. They had 5 boys, all of which are pastors. The original parsonage was not this one over here. But the original parsonage was the little white house behind TLC Daycare that belonged to Ray and Katie Miller. Betsy Ashbridge lived there. That was her home. And in those days, when people got married, they went to the pastor's house and got married there, so a lot of weddings were performed at that place. Funerals were not performed there, strictly because of the fact at that time, people had their loved ones in their parlor, their living room at home, and then took them down to the cemetery. And so consequently, at that time, a lot of times that's when the pastor showed up, was down at the cemetery. So anyway, what happened is that was the first original parsonage we had. Now I'd like to skip over to the next window over here, the Ladies' Aid Society. The Ladies' Aid Society was the membership of our church women. And essentially, the Ladies' Aid Society was formed in 1870. A very active group of women here. And so consequently, later on, the name Ladies' Aid Society got changed to Women's Guild. That was about 1945. Now, present day, it's Women's Fellowship. One thing back with the Ladies' Aid Society, they were very instrumental in getting a new parsonage built over here. They paid for that new parsonage to be built where Pastor Andy and Kristen lived. And they paid $1,000 for it. So that parsonage has been standing there for quite a long time. So I'd like to now go to the next window, which is George Stahl and family. George Stahl's wife was Anna Wiegand, related to Sophie over here in another way, which I'll get into a little bit later. George Wiegand was married to Sophie. That was his second wife. His first wife, Anna, who is George Stahl's wife, was one of the children that he had from his first marriage. So consequently, when they got married, George and his family had 4 sons: Floyd, Edgar, Walter, and Wilbur. Now Floyd, he resided on the main homestead, which is about 3.5 miles south of Smithton. And he had stayed there until the various times. As you can tell, most of all of these people that I'm going to go around and discuss, they were all farmers. And they all were farmers. However, later on, Wilbur, our whip, Stahl, as we all know him, he was instrumental in getting our lumberyard and running our lumberyard. So consequently, George and Anna Stahl are the great-great-grandparents of Joanne Day and Rick Stahl. So I'd like to bring that in. The next window that I'd like to talk about is, hold on, I gotta go back, find my windows, is William and Lisette Lindauer, right over here. William and Lisette Lindauer, again, were farmers, and they lived on Lunch Road. They had 4 sons, and they had 1 daughter. Edwin, Walter, and Philip were the 3 sons that farmed together. Edwin got the property that was next to Turner Hall Road and Lunch Road. Then the next property up was Walter. He got that. And that is where Bill and Marlene Lindauer lived. Then Philip, he also worked as a farmer. In fact, they all worked together. Their farms were adjoining, and they all chipped in together and bought the machinery, so they all owned it together. And Philip lives where his farm was the one that is the Steve Lindauer farm. Now, Herbert, he didn't want any part of farming at all. He said, no, I don't want to do this. So he lived in St. Louis, and then Melinda never married, and she lived here in Smithton. Now, Lisette and William Lindauer are the great-grandparents of Scott Lindauer. So, what I'd like to do now is go back again. I should have put these in a different way, but I didn't. We're going to go to the third window over here, which Mr. and Mrs. Charles and Clara Probst, Mr. and Mrs. George Talbot, and Mr. and Mrs. Clarence Probst. Charles Probst married Augusta Riso, and they had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. Clarence Probst, his name is on the window there, he married a gal named Margaret Talbot. And Margaret Talbot happened to be George Talbot's sister. And so George Talbot turned around and married Ella's sister, married Clarence's sister, and her name was Ella. So brothers married sisters out of that family. And Clara, of course, never married. They were all farmers. They all lived off Brenner Road And Augusta Riso, who was the wife of Charles, I believe she was a sister, or she was a daughter of Gottlieb Riso, Sr., and her brother was Henry, who happens to be the father of Norm Riso, and Ruth Riso's husband and our former mayor here in Smithton. And these people here and are depicted in this window are the ancestors and the relatives of Ray and Ida Probst. The last window I'd like to talk about gets a little tedious, and I kind of left it back here for that reason. And so consequently, I'd like to talk about that window, and that's Sophie Wiegand and her family. And the one window back there doesn't have anybody's name in it. So consequently, we're not sure if anybody ever purchased into that or not, but was left vacant. The one left, the one that's in the fellowship room, which was put where that door is right now, is in the fellowship room, and that one is there. So Sophie Wiegand, her husband's name, we'll go back to the original, was Johann George Wiegand. He was married twice. He died in 1902, and that's why we know these windows are at least 100 years old, up to maybe 110, 115 years old. That's it. That's as far back as we can track it. I haven't been able to track it farther back, if somebody else has. I can't say that. And Johann George Wiegand was married twice, like I said. His first wife's name was Margarita. He married her in 1855. She was 18, he was 31. They had 3 children, a boy and 2 girls. The first, and his first wife, Margarita, again, had 3 kids, and his first wife gave birth to 3 children, Johann George, which died, and he passed he was 19 years old, and the other 2 were girls. Anna Wiegand, who married George Stahl, and Catherine, who married John Epling, and the window in the fellowship hall over here on the bottom has Mr. and Mrs. John Epling in it. So she's the first wife. Margarita was the first wife of George Wiegand. And they were married in 1855, and she died fairly young because 10 years later, he remarried. And he married Sophia at that time. And Sophia was 22, and he was 42. And they had 3 children. And they they did their farming on Floorville Road, and later on moved into Belleville. The second wife gave birth to 3 children as well. 2, and all of them were boys. One's name was John, and he was the father-in-law to Lottie Wiegand, who used to go to our church here, and since passed. Henry, and William. And Sophia is the great-grandmother of Leland Wiegand and Irene Weiss. She is also the great-great-grandmother of Diane Roman. So these are essentially the windows that we have here that I wanted to cover and bring to everybody's notice of what everything is. Does anybody have any questions?
These theological symbols on each of these windows, did the families get some say in which symbols were going to be on their window?
I do not think that they did. I think they were put in there, and I'm not sure the families got any says on this style. But from what I could tell, I think they went and they got the Tiffany glass areas, and those particularly 4 different kinds, 4 different styles. And I think that's what Tiffany had at the time, and they put that in. I want to thank David Lindauer and Fern Lunsford for helping me on a lot of the historical aspect. I really owe a major debt of gratitude to Ruth Riso and Irene Weiss, who helped me with the historical aspect of these windows. I also want to thank all the congregation for sitting here patiently and listening to me talk about our various ancestors, our windows, and our church, so that we can take a little walk today down the path and go through and see the windows of our souls. Thank you, and God bless.